The search for the ideal surface. This just shows blasted SLA from Straumann, which is sandblasted with aluminous oxide, followed by acid etching. Acid etching alone, which really flattens the machining grooves and ends up with a smoother surface than if they just left it machined. Unite, which is an anodized surface, creates these bubbles and pores on the surface that may not be able to be maintained if exposed in the soft tissue. The textured surfaces used by Zimmer BioHorizons Implant Direct are created by blasting with a soluble blast media like HA crystals. So you blast, you wash it, it's clean. The acid etched Straumann, you need to etch to get the aluminous oxide particles off, which tends to round the threads. Now Zimmer has come up with its new surface, trabecular metal surface, and primarily claiming a greater bone ingrowth, but the implant is straight until the bottom, a little 3 millimeters of threads. There's been an FDA recall, which just means they had to inform their customers to change their surgical protocol because this threaded end, which is added after the trabecular metal is added, can come loose. It's laser welded to the body of the implant. So there's reports of it, at least one report of it coming loose. To get around that, Zimmer recommended that in dense bone just use a straight drill. Well, that means that you've got a few threads at the top here. These are micro grooves. Then you've got a non-threaded section like a cylindrical implant. Then you have the apical threads, which are not going to touch anything because they're tapered and you're using a 3.8 straight drill. This implant, the smallest diameter it can be made in is 4.1, and it has a restriction not to be used freestanding in the posterior. I don't know why that restriction was needed in order for them to get FDA approval, but you have to question this implant if it can't be used in narrow ridges, if it has limitations to immediate loading, if it doesn't add to the stability, especially when the tapered screw vent has 98% success over 10, 11 years. The only justification I can see is that Zimmer adds about another $50 to the price of the implant. We did a lot of research on implant surfaces in the 90s, SBM and HA coated surfaces, different comparison studies at different universities, and we found that the blasted surface was comparable to the HA, at least initially. The other rough surface that was popular at that time was TPS. It's off the market, it's too rough, and then acid etching, which is too smooth. Here was a study, torque removal studies. That other one was a percentage of bone contact study. This is a torque removal study comparing acid etched, TPS, SBM, soluble blast media, and HA. At 1 month, these three rough surfaces were all comparable in torque removal, but by 2 months, the HA surface was twice as firmly attached. We sell a full line of HA-coated implants, and I recommend it in the soft bone situations. Here is our blasted surface on the microthread area and the HA, which is a very dense HA, 90% approximately crystallinity, and it looks just like the blasted surface. Here's a email I received from Dr. Gary O'Brien. I just uncovered a case with 16 Legacy 3 implants, and there was 0 bone loss in all 16. Very impressive surgical results. These are some of the photographs that I thought you'd like to see. This is by far the most user-friendly, forgiving, bone-loving design, implant design I've ever placed. And you can see the bone right up to the top of the implants. Here's an email I also received from an opinion leader for Nobel, or at least he was an opinion leader until he sent this out to 2 Nobel salespeople and myself. And he said, "Hi guys, here is unfortunately a typical example of what I see too often with the replaced design. Pass these along if you like. I have not made any attempt at a comprehensive analysis, but I would estimate that at least 25% of my cases are showing unacceptably high degrees of early bone loss." And here was a follow-up of these cases, from the healing collar to the abutment attachment, and back here was a time of placement. So healing collar, a couple months later, and the abutment attached, and similar results here. So there is some question about the Ti-Unite surface, whether it contributes to this or not. Companies are looking for the holy grail to preserve crestal bone. Really, the most important thing to preserving crestal bone is have adequate thickness on the labial plate. A study was done in the early 90s that I funded. It was the largest study ever undertaken in dentistry, let alone implants. 3,000 implants, 1,000 U.S. veterans, and they placed implants of mine of different surfaces. And when they drilled the surgical site, before they placed the implant, they measured the labial plate. Then they put the implant in. When they uncovered, they measured bone loss. And at uncovering, you were seeing a direct correlation of bone loss to the thickness of the labial plate. If you had a 2 millimeter thick labial plate, you never lost any bone. If it was 1 millimeter, you'd lose about 1 millimeter. If it was thinner than that, you'd lose up to 2 or 2.5 millimeters. Nothing to do with platform switching or the attaching of the abutment later. That bone loss was occurring while the implant was submerged, merely because the ridge was thin. Now you can solve that problem to a certain extent. You can use smaller diameter implants. Don't push it with the widest diameter implant. You could flatten the ridge to create a wider platform. You could split the ridge, and you could do bone grafting, or you can just accept 1 millimeter or so of bone loss because it won't affect the clinical results. Here we have Astra with their micro threads claiming reduced bone loss. You have Nobel with their micro grooves, and then you have BioHorizons with their laser lines. And they have 8 micron laser lines for the soft tissue and 12 for the bone. Well, who's to say the bone won't be scalloped and part of it will be in the tissue or part will be in the bone? And here is a study comparing human gingival fibroblast cell adhesion and proliferation to grooves of 15, 30, and 60 microns. And what the study showed was, this study indicates that titanium substrata with etched microgrooves, 60 microns in width and 10 microns in depth, significantly enhance human gingival fibroblast adhesion and proliferation. This is why we put 60 micron grooves on our new interactive implant, so that if the top gets exposed above the bone, then for those of you that want grooves, you'll have grooves of the right dimension.